Welcome to Taming Disaster with Drones for Good podcast, presented by AiRXOS, part of GE Aviation, with additional financial support from FirstIZ and Pix4D. Tune in for in-depth interviews, one-of-a-kind perspectives, and insightful conversations with industry leaders who are using drones to help prepare for, respond to, and recover from complex emergencies and major disasters around the world. And now, from the AIRT studios in Miami, Florida, the heart of Hurricane Alley, here is your host, Christopher Todd.
Welcome to the inaugural edition of Taming Disaster, Drones for Good. I'm Christopher Todd, and I'm really excited about this new podcast series produced by the Airborne International Response Team, or AIRT. This project has been in development for the past few months, actually before the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic emerged. Taming Disaster had been on the workbench with the vision of helping to fill a niche in providing targeted content surrounding the use of unmanned aircraft systems for emergency management, disaster response, and humanitarian assistance, or otherwise known as Drones for Good. This is the precise reason AIRT was founded back in the summer of 2017. For those of you who are unfamiliar with AIRT, we're a Miami-based 501c3 organization that focuses on providing innovative unmanned aviation capabilities that help people prepare for, respond to, and recover from complex emergencies and major disasters. AIRT is also the official home to drone responders, the world's fastest growing program supporting public safety UAS operations. And therein lies the segue to introduce our first guest for this inaugural episode. He is the former fire chief from Charlottesville, Virginia, which is the home of Thomas Jefferson and the University of Virginia. This is a man who has immersed himself into the use of unmanned aircraft systems by law enforcement, fire rescue, and other emergency services organizations, and has now become perhaps the world's leading advocate for public safety UAS. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Drone Responders Director, Chief Charles Werner. Welcome, Charles.
Good morning, Chris.
So how are you holding up in Virginia during these crazy COVID-19 times?
Well, fortunately, I live in a rural part of Virginia, so I'm able to be able to go out and wander around, walk my dog, enjoy the trails without having to deal with the physical distancing and all those types of things. Otherwise, things are going great, and a lot of activities continue in the area of drone responders.
Awesome. And we're definitely going to dig into that today. I think, there's a story that needs to be told surrounding how drone responders came to be and what it's done here in its first year. We're just past the first year anniversary of drone responders, and COVID-19 kind of dampened that celebration. But I think to back up, I think it's important to start from the very beginning. And let's talk a little bit about how you first got involved with drones and unmanned aircraft systems and kind of where you saw that interest level coming from and kind of where it took you through today. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. As a fire chief, I was always regarded as the technology fire chief. So I was exploring how technologies could enhance public safety operations, both from a safety aspect as well as effectiveness. In 2015, my last year as fire chief in Charlottesville, Virginia, I started beginning to explore what drones might have to offer public safety. My first drone was a Parrot Bebop drone, and it didn't quite do what I wanted it to do to feel comfortable of exploring that technology. Then shortly thereafter, I got a DJI Phantom 3 Advanced and started seeing that the stabilization, the GPS, those types of things really gave a reliability with good video and imagery. And I saw that was where it really started making sense. So I started calling around the country and talking to different places who I had read articles about and started learning. And then the next thing happened is it led to being asked to serve as the chair of the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, Technical Committee on UAS, the 2400 Committee, and just started advocating for and promoting public safety unmanned aircraft systems.
That is pretty cool. I mean, I think there's no doubt that a lot of people have seen the benefits that these systems offer to public safety agencies of all sizes. But you've kind of taken it to a new level. You've kind of put yourself out there as perhaps the world's leading advocate for some of this technology. I know some of that started back through a conference in Crozet, Virginia, and led to the creation of the National Council on Public Safety UAS. Can you kind of walk us through how that conference came to be and kind of what came out of it that first year?
Yes, well, it was a culmination of my beginning efforts in Albemarle County with the Albemarle County Sheriff's Department to help get their unmanned aircraft system program up and running. I was one of the people who helped make a presentation to the Board of Supervisors of the county, providing the benefits of what unmanned aircraft systems would bring to the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office search and rescue team. At the same time, I had conversations with Piedmont Virginia Community College, which started the first public safety UAS training program curriculum in the country. And there came together with Darren Goodbar, and we collectively together had a conversation with Piedmont and moved forward to develop the conference, which was an idea of bringing people together for one of the first times, may have been the first national conference, to begin talking about what are we seeing, to be able to share information and learn from each other. And I think that's where the idea of going forward, realizing that this was a brand new frontier and there was very little information available for people to be able to refer to. So we were all in our own little silos, developing our own policies and procedures without any place else to look.
So I've got to tell you, this past year was my first trip to Crozet for the National Public Safety Conference, and it definitely lived up to its expectations. The campus there at Kings Vineyard is amazing. It's basically a who's who of the public safety industry. Can you tell us a little bit about how that location was selected and the relationship you had with the man who kind of offered up his land to help get this off and running?
Yeah, so we were very lucky. Early on, the same thing happened. I was able to meet David King, who was the owner of King Family Vineyards in Crozet, Virginia. And both he and Darren Goodbar and myself, we talked, and he basically said, what do we need to do? And the idea came forward about a conference. And he said, how about we do it at King Family Vineyards, and I'll offer the facility for free. It just so happens that David was also a reserve deputy with the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office and was very invested in the idea of unmanned aircraft systems. He previously had a helicopter and was a helicopter pilot and supported the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office with search and rescue operations. So this was very near and dear to his heart, and he basically opened the door and allowed us to utilize the property, which continues to happen this day, to do an annual conference so that people from all over the country, and in fact, from countries beyond the United States, to come together, share, and learn from each other.
I think one of the really cool things about that is besides David King sounding like he's just an amazing man, which I'm sure he was, the fact that he was a helicopter pilot who was willing to embrace drones and unmanned aircraft systems. It seems like a lot of times, not only in public safety, but in aviation in general, you see the manned aviation pilots ranging from broad acceptance to disdain for the drone pilots. And it seemed like Mr. King put himself above that fray and wanted to kind of get involved in everything. Am I reading that correctly, or what was his attitude towards drones in relation to unmanned aviation?
He was a huge advocate for unmanned aircraft systems. In fact, early on, we were trying to make our way into leadership in the Commonwealth of Virginia to have conversations, and he just so happened to have a relationship with Secretary Karen Jackson, who was the Secretary of Technology in Virginia, because he's on the wine board. And following a wine board meeting, he arranged a meeting for a number of us to meet with Karen Jackson to bring this idea forward, which then worked into being some direct work with the Commonwealth of Virginia. So he was a bigger than life guy, but he was also the most modest guy you'd ever talk to. He was not going to stop until he succeeded in whatever it was that he set his mind to. And unmanned aircraft systems for public safety was one of those causes. Gotcha.
So out of the Crozet conference came an organization called the National Council for Public Safety UAS. And can you tell us a little bit about how that came about and just kind of the evolution and where that organization has gone?
Well, that actually came out of a development following the National Fire Protection Association technical committee meetings. It was in those meetings, and this particular 2400 committee by NFPA was the first multidiscipline technical committee in NFPA's history to come together to develop a public safety standard for unmanned aircraft systems. And it was at that meeting where we had a lot of like minds who all agreed collectively that there was a need to be able to have some place to go, share, and learn from each other. And thus the National Council for Public Safety UAS was formed and basically created a place for some of the first policies and procedures to be shared. And then it grew to where we actually, within 2 weeks, had 30 national organizations on board to participate and have conversations. I mean, the good news is it was 30 national organizations. The bad news is it was 30 national organizations. So in some of the cases, as we move forward, trying to get everybody on the same page became a little bit more problematic.
So I think my takeaway there is it was identified pretty early on, number one, that a conference, a national conference needed to be out there to kind of help bring everyone together for the public safety UAS space. And a organization needed to be out there to help bring together all the different entities from manufacturers, program operators, pilots in the public safety sector to kind of start creating dialogue and conversation and establishing some standards. Is that fair to say? Is that kind of why the National Council came to be?
Yes. Well, and even still today, there was and there is no other organization in the United States that is totally focused on public safety unmanned aircraft systems, with the exception of drone responders.
Drone responders. So, I think everyone probably in public safety has heard about drone responders. I'm not sure that there's a really deep understanding in all corners about what it's about. So why don't you walk us through a little bit about how drone responders got started, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Right. Well, the National Council was effective to a certain point, and then it became necessary to really start looking at a different way of operating, because the National Council on Public Safety UAS was not a formal entity. And the problem therein lies is that you can't enter into corporate partnerships or have corporate patrons, because there's no way to document that funding and give some value to companies who want to actually participate with a nonprofit.
Yep.
So essentially, we kind of hit a brick wall, and that meant a lot of partnerships with different organizations as well as patrons became impossible. So fortunately, it was through my conversations with you, sharing some of the opportunities along with the frustrations, and you with the Airborne International Response Team offered us to be a home under that nonprofit organization to allow us to take that next step forward.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people don't really realize that we had kind of started working together as you were running the National Council on Public Safety UAS, and we had just got AIRT off the ground, and we started our UAS Drones Disaster Conference series. And you were gracious enough to come and help us and serve as our keynote speakers for the first several events here in Miami as well as in Los Angeles. And I think we quickly kind of saw where some of the needs were in this sector and what some of the opportunities might be to try to bring some really targeted content, both from training, from educational, from program coordination, under a single umbrella. And I that's kind of how I recall drone responders emerging, but it was almost an organic transition process, it seems, that just kind of felt really natural.
Yeah, what I saw of that is that we had very common interest, and we had the same desire to help forward and advance public safety unmanned aircraft systems, and it was just a natural fit.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And it's, it's been a real pleasure working with you on this project for the past year. I mean, I think in the COVID-19 global pandemic here, we kind of lost the opportunity to really step back and recognize that it was the 1 year anniversary of drone responders. A lot has been accomplished in that first year. What are some of the milestones that kind of stand out to you that you're especially proud of, that you think drone responders has really made a mark in the sector with?
Well, the first thing I think I'd like to recognize is our patrons who've come to support us. Again, this was that opportunity we didn't have before. So we have AiRXOS from GE Aviation, FirstIZ GMA Solutions out of Washington, D.C., Motorola Solutions Foundation, Pix4D, Skydio, the Virginia Center of Innovative Technologies, Unmanned Systems, as well as Alaris Pro. And we're continuing to see more and more interest in those areas.
Yeah, and by the way, I think it's important to recognize that this podcast series we've embarked on is brought to everyone by the generous financial support of AiRXOS, which is a part of GE Aviation, as well as Pix4D and FirstIZ. So we definitely want to thank those companies for the support they're providing to make this podcast a reality.
And I think the next area that we've really focused on is developing organizational partnerships. We don't want to rule the world and be in charge of everything related to drones. We want to partner with all the people that are out there in organizations that have specialties. So we have, of course, partnered with the Airborne International Response Team, the Alliance for Drone Innovation. We're part of the ANSI UASCC committee working on the development of gaps and standards for public safety, AUVSI, Commercial Drone Alliance, Florida International University Academy for International Disasters, the International Public Safety Association, the National Press Photographers Association, Piedmont Virginia Community College, the UASISCO, and Women in Drones, and the National Volunteer Fire Council. And that, again, is to reach out and provide what information we can to support them, but also to learn from what they're doing to bring into and share in the world of public safety UAS.
Yeah, and those are some amazing organizations. And I've got to tell you, I think the one that really kind of catches people and makes them turn their head a little bit is Women in Drones, which to me is a fascinating organization. It's focusing on the STEM education for young women and girls and the opportunity to introduce them on how these systems are being used in the public safety sector is pretty unique and pretty exciting. So I think that's it definitely seems like drone responders is kind of breaking down some of the traditional barriers that one might think of for public safety, and I think unmanned aircraft systems and unmanned technology are just a poignant example of where we can kind of stretch the boundaries beyond what would traditionally be accepted.
Exactly. And then, the next thing that I want to bring out is we're recognized as an official partner of the San Diego Integration Pilot Project with the FAA. And that's to support the Chula Vista Police Department advance their program, which people know as Drone as a First Responder, but to learn from that experience and find out how can we extend that into a beyond visual line of sight tactical operational waivers, which we are currently working on with the FAA for the general public safety community.
So how is everything going with the Chula Vista IPP? We've heard about Drone as a First Responder. It seems like they're having some good success over there. What are your thoughts on that program?
Well, I think it's opened the eyes of the possibilities. And if you just use the Drone as a First Responder program, very short example is they're able to fly automatically from a dispatch and get immediate situational awareness, which helps them determine do they need to increase the priority or can they put units back in service. That's the simple overview of what it does. So it really helps them be more effective. Plus, it provides some insight before arrival that can help increase the safety for their organization.
Yeah, I think across the globe, we see a lot of public safety agencies watching what is happening over in Chula Vista. They probably want to embark upon a similar course as the Drone as a First Responder program, but there's a lot of steps involved, both financially, strategically, and the ability to really get a community behind you as a law enforcement agency to allow for drones to start doing some types of these things. What are some of the things that public safety agencies out there need to consider if they want to start becoming more aggressive with rolling out a drone program?
Well, it just so happens that, Drone Responders has a resource center which has over 300 documents, policies, procedures, training programs. We even have a guidelines that gives you guidelines and considerations if you're going to go into this. And what people need to understand is that if they want to do a drone program and have remote pilots, there's going to be a lot more to it than just buying and flying. It gets into knowing the logistics, the hardware, the equipment, the documentation, the maintenance, the flight planning. There's a lot that goes into it. So before anybody jumps in, they need to learn what they're jumping into. And we have that guidelines within our resource center. And to access that resource center, you just have to be a member of Drone Responders, which, by the way, is free.
That it is free. And to sign up on Drone Responders, if you are not a member, visit droneresponders.org, click on the Join Member link, and become a member. There is no charge for membership, is there?
Nope. Absolutely free.
And they'll get access to all these resources for free, basically a one-stop shop to help start a public safety UAS program.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, we have 4 study research reports that we've done over the past year to give information on a lot of different aspects. We want to be able to learn from the people that are operating in the space to tell us what is actually happening and provide that information to the global community.
You know, it's interesting. Those research reports, I think there's some really valuable information in there. Those reports largely came out of some survey research and focus group research we had conducted midsummer to early fall last year. And we actually started taking a look at, the equipment public safety agencies were using. And the first report just happened to be kind of the predominant use of Chinese technology by the public safety sector. About the same time we were rolling out that report, the Unmanned American Drone Security Act was unveiled by a group of bipartisan senators in Washington, D.C. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that something that public safety agencies need to be concerned about at this point?
Well, I think we definitely have to be concerned because legislation is going to have some type of bearing on what we're able to do in the future as far as procurements. I think that what's going to be most important for people is to really pay attention to what the legislation actually says and does if it's passed, so that we can plan accordingly.
So if I'm running a public safety drone program, what are a few things that I should be watching for or considering before I go out and just start investing in brand A, brand B, or brand C at this point?
Well, I think basically you need to first sit down and determine what your mission or missions are going to be. But I would suggest that you look around from other organizations to see what's happened, because what we learned over the past 2 years is that people sit down in their organization and they develop what missions they believe they're going to fly based on what little information they may have, and it's very limited. That limited approach determines what aircraft you might buy, and you might buy the wrong thing. Some people think that they need a big drone, and we've seen organizations that have bought big drones that become more problematic because they're harder to fly. They have more complex issues and those kind of things. But the important part is to know the missions that you're going to fly. And what we've seen is that almost every organization that's a new organization in their locality that begins to fly become the center point, and they suddenly are asked to fly different missions than what they originally intended, which means now they have to look at different aircraft, different payloads, and capabilities. So it's best to try to sit down and learn from other departments that have gone through this.
You bring up an interesting point about the size of the aircraft. I think for a long time, the industry was kind of trying to decipher, are public safety agencies looking for large drones? Are they looking for small, compact drones? What is the right package to either have on a fire truck, in a police squad car? And I think what we've seen is there's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. We've seen some of the drone responders research data has shown that the small, compact systems like the DJI Mavic Dual Enterprise or the Parrot Anafi Thermal are a little bit easier for public safety agencies to incorporate into their current vehicles without having to restructure how their cars or their trucks are laid out. But I mean, what are you seeing? What are you hearing out there from people as far as what public safety professionals are looking for in these systems?
Well, I think through a number of the conferences and panels, we heard that those same size drones that you just mentioned, the Anafi and the Mavic, are probably two of the workhorses and similar like that, just because of their ability to do both visual optic and thermal, and that they're very easy to launch and they're easy to store. So it's that availability of information very quickly, which makes those more appetizing. The two most important things we saw in our survey was capability-wise was visual optics and thermal image. Then, of course, as you get into more complex operations, the ability to have Zoom capabilities, speakers, catch and release devices, lighting, and so on.
Yeah, and I, from the data that we've reviewed, we see that longer flight time is something everyone's kind of looking for. It's that holy grail of being able to remain on station and orbit a target or provide situational awareness for extended periods of time. We're not really there yet, are we?
No, but we're continuing to see enhancements in battery capabilities, which are going to change that. And I think we're going to see some more advancements come forward very soon that could give up to 50 minutes to an hour using a quadcopter, which now it kind of changes the dynamics. It helps to reduce the logistical support of that. Because right now, one of the other things people don't realize is that when you start flying, if you want to maintain a prolonged operation because you're trying to maintain a constant overwatch of something that's occurring, you have to go back and forth between drones. And in most cases, you have to be able to operate two drones, to bring one back in, send one out, do your change of batteries, and so on. So again, there's a lot more to this than just flying and buying.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really made it easy in a good way for all types of organizations, all types of sectors in the commercial sector, but especially for public safety agencies to put their arms around drones and say, we're in, we want to operate these, is the relative ease of use for flying a quadcopter. I mean, it's not really that complicated once you get used to it. But as you start looking at longer duration flight time and maybe fixed wing vehicles versus quadcopters, I mean, that's a whole different type of animal that requires a whole different series of training and knowledge for the avionics, for weather conditions, and all the different elements that come in between. Some of the additional research drone responders is kind of focused on the training and standards or lack thereof within the industry. Are you still seeing that as a big problem that's kind of holding back growth of the public safety sector?
Yes, but we are starting to see some progress in movement in certain areas. And one of the things that drone responders has really taken on learning from our panels and our conferences is that there were three priorities that were identified. The first was training standards and certifications. The second was beyond visual line of sight tactical waivers. And the third was community outreach programs that help to provide transparency and information to the communities. We're working on all three of those. We are about to launch the community outreach program. We have been working on the training and certifications, and we're having conversations currently with ASTM, which recently just came out with the Public Safety Remote Pilot Training Standard. So we're hoping to partner with ASTM. We're working with NIST very closely that has the standard test methods for small unmanned aircraft systems, which kind of gives a way of defining proficiency levels. So we're working to consolidate those three areas and continue to work on the beyond visual line of sight waivers to advance how we can make progress in public safety.
So I know you've been having some conversations with folks over at the FAA to see if there's a way to expedite these tactical beyond visual line of sight waivers for public safety agencies. Anything you care to comment on at this point?
Yeah, we've been having some really great support. We're working with Mike O'Shea, who's the public safety liaison at the FAA, and we're working through those discussions now. We're trying to make sure that we can address the safety case that's concerning, because obviously the FAA's primary mission is to maintain safety in the national airspace, and we want to do the same. And we're trying to figure out, is there a way that we can do this that will provide kind of an operational effectiveness in situations like active shooters, hostage situations, that would give us a little more freedom to fly around buildings, but not endanger the national airspace.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing that most people probably don't comprehend when they think of beyond visual line of sight, and that beyond visual line of sight for a utility company, an energy company, a railroad means long linear tracts of land, looking at transmission lines, a pipeline, railroad tracks. But for a public safety agency, that can be completely different. The need to fly beyond visual line of sight, if you're a fire rescue agency, could be just to fly around the backside of a structure fire look in the window with a thermal camera and see if somebody needs assistance. Same thing for a law enforcement operation, right? If there's an active shooter situation, you don't necessarily want to have visual line of sight with the aircraft, because that could put you in the range or become a target for whoever the shooter is. So you want to have some cover as a law enforcement person. So having these beyond visual line of sight waivers for public safety is a little bit different than I think what people generally think of when they think of beyond visual line of sight. Who's really like pushing the envelope on it? Is there anybody out there that is doing this today and is really kind of setting the standard on how these operations need to be conducted?
Right now, there are two departments that have made significant progress. One, which is Chula Vista, which is part of the FAA's IPP program, where they have a beyond visual line of sight waiver that they're using to explore and to demonstrate the reliability, the safety, and so on. So that information is being collected. The other is the York County, Virginia Fire and Life Safety Combined Sheriff's Team that have a beyond visual line of sight waiver for these type of tactical operations. So we're trying to learn from those two.
That's Chris Sadler's team, yeah?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I know Chris has been really kind of at the tip of the spear, I think, on a lot of these things too. So that's not surprising. So for a public safety agency who says, hey, I want to have a beyond visual line of sight tactical waiver, what do they need to do at this point? I
would say at this point, hang tight. Stay tuned as we come forward. We're hoping that we can help provide and share information that comes out from decision briefs and guidance from the FAA. Fair
enough. One of the other areas you said had been identified by public safety agencies as a key area of focus for the upcoming year or so was the need to generate positive public acceptance of drone operations. And it's not surprising. If you look back historically, the general public, when they think of drones, their first experience was probably military drones conducting airstrikes. So that kind of gets lodged into the back of their mind. There's movies like Terminator, where you've got these drones that have taken over the world flying through the air, trying to kill people. So it's an uphill battle right from the beginning for public safety agencies, especially law enforcement, to kind of change and shift that perception into something that's positive. And I know there's been a real collective effort with drone responders and the partner organizations to try to shift that. Can you tell us a little bit about your vision on what needs to be done there and what some of the steps drone responders is taking to help ease that transition?
Well, I think the hurricanes in 2017, Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, and all the flights flown by public safety unmanned aircraft systems had a dramatic influence on changing the mindset of people. What we're trying to do is to continue to promote that in such ways of, as we have this podcast series going forward, is to bring people in to share organization successes, how that makes a difference for people, so that both the public safety agencies and their communities can understand the value that these programs have brought, as well as an award program that we're getting ready to unveil that will, again, recognize departments for outstanding programs and, again, to highlight how these things are making a difference in our communities. But I think there's an important message here. We're learning. We created a COVID-19 task force, and we were trying to help get some agencies to fly. And, again, some of this beyond visual line of sight waivers, which kind of didn't make it too far. But we saw from this that we've got to be careful. One of the things that we saw being used was to blast messages about people that were close together, large groups. And I think that
drones yelling at people.
Yeah. And what we learned from that is that there needs to be a really careful way of going forward. If you're going to do something like that, we learned that the messaging is really important. If you're courteous and you're helpful and you're serving as a reminder, it seemed to be more readily accepted. If you're being loud and more in an ordering fashion, doesn't go over well.
I got to tell you, I completely agree with you. I mean, putting on my public information officer hat, and that's probably something a lot of people don't realize, that I am a FEMA trained public information officer and have served in various capacities therein. But the whole way that message was presented in an enforcement perspective makes me wonder, like, had some of these agencies been using drones just to thank people for social distancing or thank them for wearing a face covering, the media perception surrounding this would have been completely opposite. But because it was kind of presented in the negative that drones are chastising people for not wearing a face covering or for not social distancing, some media outlets just kind of took it to a whole new level. I mean, number one, is that fair? And number two, how do you think that should have been handled?
Well, again, I think it's being transparent, informing your community, but also being really careful in the messaging. Do it in such a way that it's positive as opposed to being dictatorial. We're seeing a lot of people starting to really be concerned about police state type situations, not just by drones, but by other things as well. So it's a compounding action. So we need to steer away from that. I do say that there were some good things that came out of it. We've seen some deliveries between medical centers, which are helping deliver samples more quickly in an easy way, especially in urban areas. But we've also saw in Chula Vista where they used it to fly their beyond visual line of sight to find the homeless population and inform them of new resources that were available, that they could come and get some medical treatment, some food, and potentially medical supplies. So there are some good things out there that we can use this for. We just have to really think through it so that we don't do more harm to what we're trying to accomplish than good.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point. If you look at how these systems have evolved over the last couple of years, it's really predominantly been gathering visual intelligence, right? It's been photos, it's been video. Now live streaming is finally becoming to the point where every agency and every department can use it relatively easily. And now we've seen audio with the speakers here with COVID-19, and package delivering supplies for disaster, trauma kits, medical testing is really that next phase of where these systems are going to make a tremendous impact on a wide variety of missions. Are there any public safety agencies looking at transporting packages or equipment right now via drones that stand out to you, or is that still kind of too early?
I think from a public safety perspective, I think that's still too early, although I think there is some exploration in that. I mean, we're also partners with New Air out of New York, and we're working collectively on an initiative now to do some testing of some flights, which will also include the Syracuse Fire Department and some other organizations to learn. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do right now, along with our participation with Virginia Center for Innovative Technologies, Drone Up, and some others, is to continue to experiment and learn so that we can advance where we can go next.
So one last COVID-19 question, and I think it's really important for people to understand. I mean, we've seen a lot of advances here from the manufacturers and from various solution providers who are really excited and bullish about the public safety UAS sector. Conversely, we're seeing the amount of money that is being spent during the COVID-19 response. And in counties like Miami-Dade County here in Florida are projecting a $300 million budget deficit. We've seen statistics from 20 to 30% of budgets are going to be reduced or restricted due to this fight against the pandemic. What impact is that going to have on public safety and specifically those drone programs that are new or just starting to get off the ground?
Well, as a former fire chief, I can tell you that we had these discussions previously, and we went through some very large cuts, saying what would we do if we had to cut our budget by 10%. The reality is, in those type situations, there's almost no way of meeting that goal without eliminating positions. So generally speaking, across the board, with the limitations that we're seeing in the current shortfall of revenue, as well as the cost being spent to deal with COVID-19, we're going to see localities and municipalities, when it comes to anything new, is they're going to say, if it says new, don't even bring it forward. That's just because they're dealing with trying to overcome the deficiencies that they know are going to exist. I'll give you an example. You talk about Miami. In Albemarle County, they reduced their budget by 10%, so they reduced $60 million. That's a huge chunk of money, which now has also resulted in no raises for employees, just because they're trying to focus all the money to try to maintain all of their people within the organization. So you're going to see a priority going to how do we keep our people on to maintain as close to the services that we have today, which doesn't include the luxury of any new things, which also means travel. It also means issues of our public safety or locality or municipality is going to be able to send people to training or conferences, which is one of the studies I think that we're hoping to do next, is to learn what impact is COVID-19 having currently and what impact do public safety agencies see it happening in the near future.
Understood. So if I'm reading you correctly, if I'm a drone manufacturer, I need to be prepared that my sales numbers are not probably going to be what the projections were for 2020 based on what's happening with the budgetary cycling in these public safety agencies. And also, as an event producer, the major conferences will probably have watered down exhibitors and attendance across the board, presuming that these travel restrictions actually get lifted and these events are able to happen. Is that fair to say? Is that kind of how you're seeing this?
Well, even if the travel restrictions are opened up, I think you're going to see that there are just no funds for the localities and municipalities to send people. So I think you're going to see all that happen.
And what is Drone Responders doing to try to combat that and try to provide some additional value for not only the solution providers and vendors, but for the agencies looking to either start or grow their public safety UAS programs?
Well, what we're trying to do is to provide information through webinars, through online information that can help them understand how to move forward. We're also looking at and urging people to consider maybe at this time you want to talk about regional programs. Can you consolidate with other teams? If you have a law enforcement and a fire team, can you combine the two to create some synergies and reduce the overall burden on each of the individual agencies to more of a collective effort, as well as regional organizations having in a region of multiple municipalities participating. So there are some ways of doing that, but we're working with AUVSI, Commercial UAV Expo, to do webinars, to provide information where people are and plan accordingly.
Excellent. So what do you see the future holding for drone responders at this point?
Well, I think what we've seen so far is there still is a need for a central repository of information because the information continues to change. So we're going to do that. I see drone responders being heavily involved in the training and the certifications area and moving that forward. I think the study and the research information of learning where people are, what they need, and how to make recommendations to go forward. We just simply want to serve as an advocate for public safety unmanned aircraft systems and provide that information to our elected officials, to our appointed officials, as well as agencies, organizations, companies, and again, to partner with academia, government, and all the other agencies to move this forward.
So we've already covered that people can visit droneresponders.org and join and register for free to get access to all this information. Are there also opportunities for people to become more directly involved with drone responders? Are you looking for people to help you with this mission? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about, where some of the areas of need are?
Yes. Well, we have formed a number of working groups. So we have the Major Cities Working Group, which is designed to look at and share unique opportunities and challenges in the metro cities. That's one area that people can become involved. The second is Women in Drones, is trying to promote how women can be actively involved and promote that for girls and young women as far as the future. We've got the COVID-19 task force, which again is looking at what is this doing to us from a public safety UAS perspective. And we are moving forward with a lot of different initiatives. So if people are interested in being involved, we can certainly take that membership and their interest levels and see what else we have. In addition, I forgot to mention this, but we have an international advisory committee. One of the things that we didn't anticipate was such large number of involvement. We have over 40 countries that have people participating to learn what we're doing and share information. So it's really grown to be more than just a national program, but it's actually grown to be an international program. And
are there any last thoughts, anything you want to cover or let the audience out there know about drone responders or public safety UAS in general?
Well, I think the one thing that I'd like to share the most is that we realize that public safety drones can only be successful if we have the best of the best coming together. And that means that we are working with academia, that we are working with government, that we are working with the industry and businesses in this expertise area, as well as the other organizations like GIS and artificial intelligence and augmented reality. So if you have any of those interests that have an intersection with drones, we very much are interested in your participation.
And we'll leave it at that for episode 001. DroneResponders.org is the URL. Free information, register for free, learn how you can get involved in the public safety UAS sector with Chief Werner and the entire team at Drone Responders. Again, DroneResponders.org or on the web at Drone Responders. Chief, thank you very much for joining us today on Taming Disaster. We hope you enjoyed the experience, and I'm sure you and I will be talking again real soon.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris. And again, enjoy the partnership and look forward to new opportunities for public safety on unmanned aircraft systems.
Charles Werner, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next time on Taming Disaster, Drones for Good.
Thank you for listening to Taming Disaster, a production of AIRT, the world's leading nonprofit organization supporting drones for good. Learn more about us online at airt.ngo. And be sure to tune in to our public safety focused podcast, Drone Responders, hosted by Charles Werner.